We're going to be learning the final daf in the 7th chapter. We began the sugya yesterday at the end of daf Pei Hey Amid Beis, where Rav says that Gagin va'aliyois loy neskachu, that the rooftops and the second stories, and we understand the Rav to be referring both to Yerushalayim and to the Azara, they were not consecrated, and that would mean that the kachrei kalim cannot be eaten in second stories in Yerushalayim, and that will obviously also include Koren Pesach. We're going to be learning that the rooftops were in the Azara were somewhat consecrated, not with the same kedusha of the Azara, but the utensils that were used in temple construction, even though they did not need to be stored in a consecrated place, but we stored them in a place that had more kedusha. So there was some kedusha imbued on the rooftops, on the second stories, but not the same level of kedusha of the Azara, not the same level of kedusha that was needed to permit, for example, the storage of a klei sharis. The Gemara is going to attempt a few times to refute the Rav, but the Rav will not be refuted. We're going to have the Mishnah, the final Mishnah of the Perek. The Mishnah is going to be speaking about the requirement of eating the Koren Pesach in one location. As the Gemara will clarify, the Mishnah is only following the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda that holds that even when you have many people registering on one animal, they don't have to eat it all together. They can eat it in different groups. We're going to learn that the Tanach Reb Shimon disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda. Their machlokes isn't only about whether you have to eat it together, whether you can lechatchila divide the animal into different chaburas, but there's other nafkaminas between Rabbi Yehuda and Reb Shimon, and their machlokes will be contingent on a more broad machlokes, and that is whether we say aim la mesoiris, meaning do we give primacy to the written form. The words in the Torah are written through, how do we know that the words are spelled the way they are? Through the tradition, through the Masoiris. Now, many letters, when they're put together, can be pronounced different ways. Rabbi Yehuda allows for us to learn different dinim from different options of pronouncements, because the ikid is to stay loyal to the written form. Adarabba, when a certain word that's written the way God wants it to be written, if it can be read various ways, we dafka learn from the various ways that it could be pronounced. Reb Shimon holds known, yesh aim la mikra. Aim la mikra means is that we can only learn from the way God tells Moshe Rabbeinu how we are to pronounce a word. And that is obviously a machlokes that will affect many different dinim in the Torah, as it does over here. We're going to have on Daf Pei Vav Amid Beis a phenomenal story of the Amoyre Rav Huna, who once visited the home of Rav Nachman by Yitzchak, and the many dinim that we learned from the exchange of words that they had. And finally, at the end of the Perek, we're going to clarify the responsibilities of a waiter. At what point does he have to start serving the crowd? It's a lot easier for a waiter, for a shamish, who agreed to be of service, to only start a service when everyone is sitting together. But we will learn that that's not necessarily the case, that of course it's easier for him to serve everyone in one go, but once you have 3 people or more gathered, even if the other people are not there, they can ask of him, they can so to say demand of him to start a service. We're going to learn what point is the end of the service of the waiter, after which you can say, I did not agree to stay on, to linger on up until this point. And a lot more. It's a beautiful daf. We left off on daf Pei Vav Amid Aleph, 5 lines from the top of the Amid. At the end of the line, Tashema. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol na'im v'dvarim. So Nachum, Rav says that the rooftops, that the upper stories were not consecrated. Says the Gemara, how can Rav say that when it says in a Braisa, Abba Shol Oimer, Aliyah's base kachrei kachim, the upper story of the kachrei kachim, as we know, that the Beis Hamikdash, Mamash had 2 stories. And when we learned Midrash, when we'll learn Midrash again, God willing, with all of the pratim of what was in the second story, how it was positioned, v'chulei. And the Braisa says that the second story, chamura means it's subject to a more stringent laws from the downstairs. And where do we find this chumrah? So Abba Shaul says, even though generally a person was never allowed to enter, but we all know, Pashas Acharei, the Avodah of Yom Kippur, that Kohen Gadol, yes, nichnas loy pam achas bashana. By the way, it's not stam pam achas. On Yom Kippur, he entered 4 times. He entered various times, but it was, in the Avodah of Yom Kippur. However, in contrast, you're not allowed to enter there either, according to one opinion, pamachas bashavua here means 7-year cycle, either once in 7 years. Other people say pamayim bashavua, twice in 7 years. The third opinion says pam achas bayovel, only once every 50 years. To ascertain what repairs, if any, are needed there. Bottom line is that the Aliyah's Beis Kachim was consecrated, was sanctified. How can Rav say that Aliyah's, right? Gagois va'aliyahs le'niskachu, answers the Gemara, the first white line. Omar Rabbi Yosef, I'll tell you. Mehechol nekom v'nesev inish is a man standing up and attempting to challenge Rav from the Heichol. The Heichol is different. Now we're standing with what we said. Rav was not only referring to Yerushalayim and HaKodesh. Rav was also referring to the Azara. But there were many structures in the Azara. You are trying to refute Rav from the Heichol. Shani Heichol. Because since it says in the second line in Divrei Hayamim that Vayitein David l'Shlomo Benoi Estabnes Ulam, that he gave the design, the blueprint of the antechamber and of bottom and of the houses, ve'ez gan zakov, and of all the storage rooms, va'ali Yosef, and we're focusing on this word and on the second stories. And we just quoted the Abba Shaul was about the Aliyah and v'chadar v'pnimim and all of the inner rooms. Guys, remember all of the many inner rooms that we had in the walls. It's moededik and midas. Ubeis paroiches, and the house that the room that houses the kapoides. It's interesting, the cover, because the cover al pi chasidus is soivev, the highest madrega, and it says that all of these designs that David gave to Shlomo, hakoil biksav miyad Hashem olai hiskil, that David was inspired with nevuah, with ruach hakodesh, and it is precisely that which he put on paper. In other words, when we're speaking about the Aliyah, since that was where Hashem was Megale to David and to Shlomo exactly how to make it, that's different. That they were Mekadosh. Rav was speaking about the Beis HaMikdash complex, but not about the Aliyah of the Heichal. He was speaking about the other houses that we know when we learn Midrash. There were many houses and chambers that were out throughout the Azara, and that is what Rav is saying, that in those chambers, Taka, the ground story up until the ceiling, was imbued with the Kedusha of the Azara, but not the second stories and nor the roofs, and the same thing in Yerushalayim. Tashima, another attempted question, challenge, refutation against Rav from a Mishnah. Mishnah writes, Halishkois habenoyes ba'kodesh. All of the chambers that are built ba'kodesh, my friends, just to make a clarity, we're speaking about the chambers that were built connected to the Azara, and some of it is outside the Azara. Outside the Azara, the Mishnah calls it choil. It's no way choil. It's just, Lefierach, the Kedusha of the Azara, we're calling it choil. Outside the Azara, what's called Machna Shechina, then you have Harabais, Machna Leviyah. So it says like this, that what happens if there's a chamber that its location is in one area, but its entrance is in another area? So how do we determine the Kedusha of that chamber? The Mishnah has one Nakuda. It's where the Pesach is, where the entrance is, and not where the chamber proper is. So therefore, says the Mishnah, Halishkois, even though the chamber itself is, so to say, if you look at the map of the Azara, it's on the Bakodesh. But the opening, the door, people who enter and exit will go into choil. Choil here again means the harabayis. So says the Mishnah that we follow the Pesach, and therefore, if it's pesucha is to harabayis, even though the chamber itself, so to say, is on the ground, if you look at the map, if you look at the aerial view, it's in the parameter of the Azara, we don't judge it that way. Fakert. Toichan choil. However, here's the kasha. Vigag goy sehen, but the roofs are not inside. They are on top. They are kodesh. So clearly we see we're not speaking here about the heichel, the Aliyah on top of the kodesh hakadosh. We're speaking about all of the chambers, fakert, the chambers that are spread out. Fakert, they are in the outermost part of the Azara, and nevertheless, the Gag is kodesh with kedushas Azara. Kasha against Rav. So here Rab Chizda got very creative. So Targum Rab Chizda that this Mishnah is only referring to b'shegag goyseyim shavin lakarka azara. Wow. So we're speaking about chambers that were mamish dug out like subterranean. People call them basements, but this is chashav. This is in the azara. They were like caves underground. And the gag of these chambers, since the chambers were dug underground, their roofs were mamish on the same height of the floor of the Azara. That's different. Says the Gemara, then the Mishnah won't flow. Look at the Sefer of that same Mishnah. And the Mishnah again is following this principle that it goes after the Pesach. That if Beno is b'choil, and we're saying it means underground, right? So if you have this chamber that was built underground, but in choil, meaning in the harabais, but since if in those cases where psucha is la kodesh, where the door, the entry, the exit is directly in the Azara, so again we follow the Pesach and toichan kodesh. But here says the Mishnah, the gag goysei hen is choil. Now the problem is like this: the salka daitoch that we're speaking about shegag goyseim shava lakarka Azara. Now, guys, we're not challenging the fact that Gag goysei choil, because if the Gag is on the ground, here we are speaking about in the Sefer, the chambers were built on the Harabayas, which means the Gag is aligned with the Harabayas. So therefore, choil means, nope, we're not challenged with the Gag. The problem is, but then it means that the chambers themselves, they are built under the ground. And we are saying that what? That since psucha is la kodesh, toichen kodesh, that's a problem. How can you say toichen kodesh when there is a klal that all of the chambers, all of the tunnels, everything that was built under the ground has a din of choil? In other words, these chambers are also known as mechilos. I know mechilo sometimes means a dance, it means a circle. Here, mechilos means tunnels. If the Mishnah is speaking about a gag that's aligned to the floor, which means the chambers are underground, the problem is from Rabbi Yechanan, and we had Rabbi Yechanan before. Here in Pesachim and Daf Samach Zayin, that mechilos, all of the tunnels under Harabayis, loines kachu, were not consecrated. And you know why they were not consecrated? Because most of these tunnels were built that if someone becomes a Balkeri, and as we learned also in Pesachim, that a Balkeri has to leave not only Machna Shechina, but a Balkeri, like a Zov, according to the Tanach Rab Shimon, but we paskin that way, has to leave Harabayis. So a person becomes a Balkeri, what should he do? So you have a kohen, we learned this in Talmud, they sleep in the Beis HaMoikad. And that part of the Beis HaMoikad is like a harabayas, in the room with the fire. But if they have a 7 mission at night, it was very common in the times of Chazal and prior. So they would leave through the tunnels. Like this, they are already out of Kedushas Harabayis. The problem is, it doesn't fit with the mission. So the Gemara gives a Gavaldic answer. Hold on, Rabbi Yechanan is correct. However, our approach will work because Kika Amar Rabbi Yechanan, that all of the mechilos that are under the Harabayas, the tunnels in the Harabayas, were Bechlau not consecrated. That's only those whose doors were into the Harabayas, Psuchais la Harabayas. And the Sefer of the Mishnah, that's the Sol Mishnah, Kitanyahi, was Psuchais la Azara. Yeah, and the ones that opened up to Azara were imbued with Kedusha of the Azara. Rav is standing. Frag the Gemara, hold on. But V'hatanya, we learned the Braisa, that the Rebbe Yehuda Oimer, that Mechilois, mitachas haheichol are also choil. And therefore what? So how do we have before in the Mishnah? Again, we're saying that in order for this not to contradict Rav, that all of these chambers are dug underground. They're all dug underground. And mechilos mitachas haheichol has a din of choil, and you're telling me that Rabbi Yechanan's statement, right, are the ones that are under Harabayis, but Rabbi Yechanan is being moida. that the ones that are under the Azara, have kodesh. No, even the ones that are under the Heichal are also chayil. So again, answers the Gemara. Yeah, they are chayil because this is the theme of the Mishnah that we follow the Pesach. Ki tanya hahi shepsuches l'chayil. But the ones that were not psuches l'chayil, we are concluding the mechilois under the Heichal, the mechilois under the Azara do have the kedusha of the Azara. Yeah, Rabbi Yechanan's statement was only regarding the mechilas under the harabayis, but now there's another detail, which is how do you determine is it under the heichal or under the azara versus under the harabayis? It's not geographically is it under there. It's about where the Pesach is. And psuchas l'chayil has a din of the harabayis. Psuchas l'kodesh has a din of the kodesh. Okay. And Rashi says that the following words is a hemshech of the Braisa that we have one line above, where Rabbi Yehuda Omer mechilois mitachas ha'eichal is choil. And then it says v'gagoy kodesh. Now we have a problem. Because Mela, okay, Rav says Aliyah and the gagois lo niskatru. We learned that the second story, the Aliyah of the Kodesh HaKodshim, has even more Kedusha. Okay, so then we answered because of the Pasuk and Divrei Hayamim. Look in the Pasuk and Divrei Hayamim on the second line in this Amid. You won't find the word Gag. The Pasuk mentions the Ulam and the Batov and the storage rooms. Va'ali Yosef. The Ali Yosef is what answered the Braisa of Abba Shol. Problem is, this Braisa says that the Gag, the roofs of all of the structures in the Azara complex were Kodesh. Now this L'choida goes against Rav. All of those Gagin were not included in the Ruach HaKodesh. Oh. So says the Gemara, V'tizbara, do you even think this is a kasha? This is not a challenge. I'll tell you why. Because for Ketani, Gagin, Halalu, the same Braisa that you're quoting that says Gagon Kodesh, says explicitly, no, it's not Kodesh like the Azara. Fakert, it's a Raya Terav. That Gagan Halolo ain't Oichlin Sham Kachi Kachim. Kachi Kachim has to be consumed in the Azara. If the rooftops would have been imbued with the Kedusha of the Azara, then you can eat Kachi Kachim. Likewise, Ve'ein Shoichlin Sham Kachi Kalam. Unlike Kachi Kachim that has to be slaughtered, Dafka L'Tzvayin HaMizbeach, three-way Machlekes Tanoim, where is Tzvayin HaMizbeach, Kachi Kalam Korbanis can be slaughtered anywhere in the Azara. And this Braisa says not on the Gag. Fakir, this Braisa is a proof that the Gag was not imbued with the Kedusha. The problem is, you can't erase the words that we just quoted. What do you do with the words Gagoy Kodesh? So for that answers the Gemara, Amar Rav Chama Bar Guria, like we mentioned in the introduction, that you had, like this, the Kalim that we call Klei Sharis. The Kalim that were used in the Avodah of the Mizbeach, which have the highest level of Kedusha, not only do they have Kedusha, but they need to be stored in a place that has Kedusha Vazar. That's the Kalim of the Mizbeach. What about all of the other utensils that were used, for example, in construction? Which they were used for the Beis HaMikdash. So even though, this is important, the Rishonim say, you were allowed to store them in a place of Choil, but still the Yidden felt this is being used for the construction. They wanted to store it in a place that has some Kedusha. So we're learning really about a new level of Kedusha. You have the Machna Shechina, you have the Kedusha of the Azara, then you have the Kedusha of Harabayis. Now we're learning about areas that had more Kedusha than the Harabayis, but they did not have the full-fledged Kedusha of the Azara. So you can't eat Kachim there, you cannot Shech Kachim Kalam there. Why did they give it a little bit more Kedusha? To store those building utensils. And now the Gemara is going to remind us, we're going to review some very interesting building utensils that were used in the construction of the Beis HaMikdash. Just another word of introduction. Guys, all of this we'll learn, God willing, properly in Midrash. But as you entered the Beis HaMikdash, even though there were many entrances, but generally the people went mi Mizrach laMa'arav. We went from the east to the west, and the further more west, the holier it becomes, as you can see in all of the beautiful pictures of the setup of the Beis HaMikdash. Now there's an eastern gate, and you're going from east to west. When you're entering one of the main entrances, they called a entrance the Shushan Habira Gate. Why was it called the Shushan Habira Gate? Because since the Persians were instrumental, not only in giving us permission to build the second Beis HaMikdash, but they actually funded the building of the Beis HaMikdash, and perhaps they even paid for the maintenance, which is the hardest thing to give for at least during the beginnings of the times of the Beis Hamikdash. So whether we did it to give them covet, whether they forced us to do it, we should remember the chesed they did to us. There was the highlight or the high line or the city line, however you call that. There was a certain image of Shushan Abira, huge.
Skyline.
Skyline. There was a skyline of Shushan Abira on that gate. So when you entered the gate, you looked, you saw Shushan Abira. Now that entrance had two little towers on both of their sides. So if you're just to have in cup, if you're going from east to west, the sides are north and south. And on top of these towers, that's for beauty, there were storage rooms. And that's what we're going to be learning about right now. What was stored in those storage rooms? And the importance of having a one to the north and one to the south, because there were certain measuring utensils that were very similar, but not the same. I'll say it already by heart. Yes, Baruch.
Was that Haman's money?
No, that was not Haman's money. That was not Haman's money. Baruch is mentioning Haman. Well, let me say, once you give the money to the IRS, is it your money or is it the IRS's money? It's the IRS's money. So it wasn't Haman's money. It belonged to the government. Okay, now like this. Moshe Rabbeinu gave us the measurements. And every now and then we learn about how many of the measurements were made larger because of inflation. One of the fundamental measurements is an amma. Now, an amma literally means the hand from the tip of the middle finger, which is why the middle finger is called amma, until the edge of the elbow. This is called an amma. Whether it's 1.9 feet, the way we paskin when it comes to tzitzis, like 1.5 feet. Like we go by tzitzis, it has to be an amma by 2 amma. So we want 19 inches. People get the size 24. Good for you. That's because it gets crumpled up. But there are shiurim. Now, amma, we learned this, I think, in Pesachim. We learned this in the Rambam. Even though you have an amma bas chamisha tvachim, remember that? And an amma bas shisha tvachim. The amma of Moshe Rabbeinu was an amma of 6 tvachim. Every tefach is comprised of 4 finger breadths. Guys, remember this klal. Every time we speak about a finger breadth, we're speaking about the width of a thumb. So a tefach is 4 of these. 6 tefachim is 1 amma. So how many finger breadths do you have in an amma? 24. That's called the amma of Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, for a reason that we'll learn right now, in the Beis Hamikdash's construction, they had, in addition to the amma of Moshe Rabbeinu, which would mean the standard amma, they made 2 other ammas. One was a half a finger breadth bigger than Moshe's, and one was yet even another half, a total of a 1. And not to confuse, so you had measuring sticks. Really, we had 3. Now, the standard one we're not concerned about because everywhere copied the amma of Moshe Rabbeinu. 24 fingers. In the Beis Hamikdash, there was a chiddush. There were larger ones, but not just one larger, 2 larger, a little bit larger and a lot larger. And not to confuse them, so they were stored either in the north or in the south. Let's read it now inside. So says the Gemara that like Amar Rav Chama bar Guria lo oisen beis amois, for those unique 2 different types of amma measuring sticks, as we learn Chevre. The Tnan beis amma yisrael b'shushan abira. See, without learning this, it sounds like in Shushan Abira. It means in the Holy Temple, right? But we're speaking about in the upper chambers that are adjacent to the entrance of the east. The eastern entrance, known as the Shushan Abira entrance, one was Al Koren Publisher on the north and eastern storage room, on the tower of Achas, Al Koren Publisher on the southern eastern one. And now we speak which one was on which. Zush Al Koren Publisher, the one that was on the north and eastern storage room. Hoysi Yiseda Al Shal Moshe, only it was the one that was larger, but it was only a little bit larger. How much larger? The Amma wasn't 24 etzba'is, it was 24 and a half etzba'is. And Zush Al Koren Publisher is south. Guys, north is Gevura. Gevura is your limit. So even if it's larger, it's not that much larger. South America, Brazil, chesed, abundance, so it's, more, always more. Mizrach is the Remes. Hoysi said another chatzi etzba. It's interesting how it's worded. In other words, Nim says that the one that was in the south was a total of 1 finger. Nim says he say that al shel Moshe etzba. Okay. And now before we go on, that answers the question. Now these kalim were used for the construction. Do they need to be stored in Kodesh? No. But we wanted to store it in Kodesh. On the other hand, and it was stored on the gag. I'm sorry, not in a chamber, on the roof. But we wanted to give the roof a little bit of Kedusha. Stam, you have kelim that are used under construction, so that's the pshat of a gagoy kodesh. Now the Mishnah there is explaining the lama, right? The lama hoisa achas gedoyla va'achas ketana. So he explains like this: shiur ha'umanim noitlam b'ketana gavaldik umachzinim b'gedoyla. When craftsmen would fix a price, they're going to work for the Beis Hamikdash and they're going to get paid for 10 feet kach v'kach. So when they fixed the price, the 10 feet was the standard measure. When they actually did the building, they needed to use one of those two larger ones, which means that they delivered a little bit more. Why was that done? Because if they would have erroneously, if they would have given the exact amount, and if they would have made a mistake and give a little bit less, then they're taking money for something that they did not deliver. The money belongs to the temple. That's me'ilah. Gavaldi. In other words, Kadei Shelo Yom L'Dei Me'ilah. They will always, they always charge a little bit less. So now we're still not done, because now we still have to explain. So therefore, it makes sense that when they actually built and they gave a measurement, they used the amma that's a little bit larger. But why did we need to have two larger types? V'tartolamali answers the Gemara, because we also have to be fair for the craftspeople. If they were building something made either out of silver or out of gold, we want for them, so to say, to charge slightly less, but we don't want them to lose money. And if the item that they're giving is very precious, the more they give, that's all of their revach. So therefore, it suffices to add a half a finger. And then there was the one that was even larger, the one that was in the Darim, in the southeast, that was a full etzba, more than the Am of Moshe, that was Libinyana for everything else in construction. They still made profit, but they protected themselves of not inadvertently misappropriating, taking money from Hegdish for something that's not correct, and be chayv me'ilah. Okay, now let's conclude with, again, how will Rav align with our Mishnah? The Mishnah on Daf Peheyim and Vei says that Tanan hachaloinos, both the windows, and the oivei hachoyma, the depth of the wall, is kilifnim. Now hold on. Frek the Gemara, bishleima hachaloinos. What did Rav say? Anything that's already a structure above the ground, the gagois, the aliyahs, loinis kachu. Isn't this going against the Mishnah? So the Gemara understands when it comes to the windows, since the Beis Hamikdash is built on a mountain, and as we know from Midrash, it wasn't all on one level. So you had a piece that was leveled out, then you had steps, then you had another level. In those scenarios, it's shayach many times that windows from a higher part, right, they touch the ground. Windows from the lower part, when you go higher, the higher level is aligned, the ground is aligned to the bottom of the window. Oh, the bottom of the window, if it touches the ground, so then it has Kedusha, says the Gemara. So, and only that is the chalonis that the Mishnah is saying that is imbued with Kedusha. But when it comes to the depth of the wall, we're speaking about on top of the wall. Was there any top of the wall that on one hand it's a wall and on the other hand it was mamash aligned with the ground? No, it was not. Says the Gemara, yes, that in the Beis Hamikdash complex you have regular walls and you have what we call a chayil. A chayil is a very low wall, or in the words of the Gemara, it's called, there's a shura. It's amazing. Shura, many people understand to mean a line. It means a wall. And then there is a bar shura, a yingala, a low wall. Yeah, there were certain low walls that they aligned with the ground of the Azara from one side. And as it says, this is regarding the Churban Habayis, that Vayavel Chayil v'Chayma, words in Eichel, that Hashem made both the Chayil and the Chayma mourn. What is the Chayil? The Taich in English is rampart. It's very low towers. So Amar Rab Chama, Amar Ravacha, Amar Vayteber Rab Chanina, that means the Shura, the normal walls. So mourning meaning that they were destroyed or they were sunken into the ground. Ubar Shura. Bottom line is, Rav stands his ground that the Gagos Aliyah is loyin is katru. And Chevra, here we start the last Mishnah on the Perek. We quoted this Mishnah already in the past, But as we will see in the Gemara, that this Mishnah, even though it's not written b'shem anyone, is really only Rabbi Yehuda. Let's learn the Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, Shtei chaburoi shehoyu oichlin b'bayis echad. If two groups are eating in one house, one group is allowed to face in one direction and to eat, and the other group is allowed to turn the face and to eat. And like Rashi says, the Mishnah is not telling you that you have to divide into groups. The Mishnah is being mechadesh that even if we're speaking about one lamb, now guys, we have to eat it up. I have no idea how many people are needed, each one eating a kazais. Does a lamb have 100 kazaisim? I don't know. Let's say a lamb has 100 kazaisim. 100 people is a very big group. So even if you have these 100 people that were registered on the same animal, the Mishnah is telling you they don't have to eat it together. And even if they're eating it in the same house, you don't say, well, anyways, in the same house, let's make this big ches. You don't have to do it that way. If they want, they can divide into groups, even if one group will be facing one side. It's clear that they're, so to say, separating themselves. It doesn't matter. They're not mechuyev to eat it together. Furthermore, since we are allowing this carbon to be eaten in two different groups, that the hamecham, it was common that near people would eat, there would be a table upon which you would have hot water. Hot water then was not used for coffee. I don't know if they had coffee then, but they had wine, and the wine needed to be diluted. And we have with us Gabriel, the great shiur wine guys, but they used to have warm wine. Today we put the wine, we chill the wine. They had all different customs. So what they had was they had the thick wine, the undiluted wine, and the water was in a mecham, and the mecham was near the table. So if they were allowed to put the mecham bo'enza, that would mamash create a mechitza. And the hash of nekuda. And again, what's the chiddush? That not only can they eat separately, you can create a divider. Doesn't matter. All of this is Rabbi Yehuda, guys. We will see Rabbi Shimon does not allow that. Rabbi Shimon says that everyone from the same animal must eat in one group. Now comes the Mishnah with another din regarding a waiter, a shamish. Now, a shamish, just to make it clear, a shamish to eat from the Koren Pesach, obviously he needed to pre-register on it, which he did. Problem is that Rabbi Yehuda has another thing. Even though the animal can be divided into two groups, but the Yechidim, I have to stick to my group. I cannot go back and forth. The animal can be divided into 10 groups, but I have to begin and end in one location. Now, what does a shamish do? A shamish, if he's waiting both of the groups, so he has to pick which group he's going to eat with. Now, once he picked the group on the right, is he allowed to service the group on the left? Yeah. However, no one should suspect that he's eating in both places, says the Mishnah, that when the shamish is standing up to pour or to dilute the wine for the other group, the group in which he's not eating, then he has to close his mouth. It should be clear that he's not eating with that other group. And not only that, imagine, he can't even face the group who he is serving because he chose to eat with the other group. So he tilts his head towards that other group, so anyone that will look at him, right, will not even suspect that he's going there to eat. His mouth is closed, his face is turned. It will be clear that he's going there only to be mishamish now. He doesn't have to stay that way the whole time. But the moment he comes back to his group, then he can continue to eat. And the final din of the Mishnah, v'hakala. So Rashi says that the kala is referring to, kala is a woman within the first week of her marriage. And if we are smart, we can make our wives feel like a kala their whole lives. But the din of a kala is in the beginning of the marriage. And we're speaking according to Rashi, she joined the group of Koren Pesach. Everyone is eating the Pesach, but people are looking at the kala. She is modest. She's not comfortable. She's shy. She doesn't want people to look at her. B'shanon Shulchan Aruch, it says we're not allowed to look at people while they eat. But people are looking at the kala, so she is allowed to, she's allowed to turn her face away, even though the way the Shama shows that he's not eating with the group is by turning his face away. She is eating. There's only one group. So we allow for her to turn her face away, even though it gives the appearance like she's eating with the group or she's not eating with the group because of her sense of modesty. Okay. Says the Gemara that this din, we learned really two dinim. Aleph, that you can divide the Pesach into various groups, into various chaburas. Mitzat Sheni, the people have to stick to their group. These two dinim are connected one to the other. It's two sides of the same coin. Is only Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanya, and here we will learn both sides. It says in Abraisa, when it says on Parshas Boy regarding the pasuk says to place the blood. Where? Al habatim, on the homes. Asher yoichlu oisam bohem, where you're going to eat in it the carbon Pesach. That was in Mitzrayim. Focus on the Lashon Yachid, Lashon Rabim, guys. Oisoi is it. Then Lashon Rabim, Zokt, the Tana, Melamed, the fact that we're speaking about one animal that's being eaten bohem in them in homes, Lashon Rabim. Oh, that the Pesach could be divided into two chaburos. Now, Yachol Yehei ha'oichel oichel b'shtei mekaymois. You would think that the individual can also eat in two places. I have to register on this animal. But the moment you have the same animal, we all register on the animal. But you have your group, I have my group. Maybe in the middle, I can join your group, you can join my group. We all registered on the same animal. So for that, Talmud loyman. Now these are the key. That's the Eim La Mikra, Eim La Masoides. It says, Babayis echad yei ochel. Yei ochel is the way we have the tradition of pronouncing it. The written letters, which is the Masoides, is Yud Aleph Chaf Lamed, which could be pronounced Yoichal. Oh, and we're going to read it inside the Rashi. He explains you the difference between Yei Ochel and the Yochel. The Bayis Echad Yei Ochel. So look inside the Rashi already, 3 lines on the bottom of the Amud. Guys, we're going to be learning Rashi now. Then we'll chap the Gemara very easy. That Rabbi Yehuda Savar Yesh Eim La Masoides. That what takes primacy is to stay faithful to the written text, and we have now the right to read it, to darshan, by voweling it, even though when you read the Torah, we know we have to vowel it, yei achel, but you can learn from any way it's written. And therefore, yoichal, he should eat it. Yoichal means he in the singular. Mashma adam echad oichloi bebayis echad. The he, if you read it yoichal, the he has to eat it in one location. Now, if you can only darshan yei achel, babayis echad yei it's pung fakert. Yei achel means the animal. Yei achel is on it shall be eaten. Yoichel means you should eat it. Is this word on the person or on the animal? According to Rab Shimon, yesh eim la mikra, yei achel dafka. That's the only drasha. Babayis echad. The animal has to be eaten in one group. Fakert, Rab Shimon holds that you as a yachid, you can go to another group. You can leave in middle. You as a yachid. The animal has to be eaten in one group. Rabbi Yehuda says, yesh eim la masoides. Fakert, from the pasuk as we began in the Gemara, alabatam asher yoichlu oisoi bohem. From that we learned that the Pesach can be divided into two groups, but you have to stay faithful to one. Let's read it now inside. Mikan amru. From here we learn, according to Rabbi Yehuda, shashamish sha'achal kazayis mitzaratanur. Now that you can only eat it in one place, what happens if the shamish, since he has access to the food when it's still in the kitchen, then the kitchen was near the oven, if he put a piece of meat into his mouth, that means that he ate there. He can only eat it over there. In Pikeyahu, if he's smart and he's going to chop, I cannot eat it now at the table, is mamalik eresim imenu. Okay, you already began near the tanur, that's where you're going to eat it. And furthermore, for Abbas Yisrael not to make the waiter eat by himself, the waiter cannot join the dining room. For people now to include the waiter, they should move to the waiter. He stuck to that location because babayis echad yoichal. That's the way we darshan. However, the final line of the Rab Shimon says, no. The pasuk that you began quoting, right, on the houses in which they eat it, melamed faket, that the one who is the eater can eat it in bohem. That I may eat it in two places. The animal, this carbon Pesach, has to be consumed in one place. Daf pei vav amid beis. Yachol yehei nechol b'shtei chaburos, like the Mishnah, like Rabbi Yehuda. No, that's Rab Shimon. Talmud leimer b'bayis echad yei ochel. In one house shall the animal be eaten. In other words, so just to make it clear, if the animal has to be eaten in one place, that means that all of the registrants need to lachatchila sit down in one place. But once I already sat down in one location, I am allowed to go to another location. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, that's not allowed. And but Michael Mifligi, Rabbi Yehuda holds yesh eim lamasoides, like we spoke on in the Rashi, Everyone agrees that the Torah has the words Yud Aleph Chaf Lamed. Everyone knows that when you read the Torah in the Beis in the shul, you have to read it Yei Achel. The Achel is referring to the animal. But if the primacy is just to stay faithful to the written text, and when we darshan, we can read it the way it looks. You can read the same words Yoichal. Yoichal goes on the mensch, and therefore the person cannot leave. The shamash began eating next to the tanur, he has to stay there. The animal can be divided. Rab Shimon holds yesh ein la mikra. You can only read it, and the way you read it, not only in the shul, the way you darshan, on the way Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu, it should be pronounced. Mikra means pronounced. And therefore, since you pronounce it yei achel, the achel is referring to what? It's referring to the animal. The animal has to be in one location. The registrant, if he started in one location, he can move to another location as a yachid. Okay. No, he can go to another house. Now another very important detail, just as an intro. Even though we're saying that according to Rab Shimon, one person can leave his group, that's only one yachid. The whole group cannot move its place. The whole group cannot move its place. So now, what will be the nafkamina between the Gemara is going to give two interesting nafkaminas, two interesting scenarios that if people were sitting, the nifras a mechitza b'neim and a mechitza after they sat in one group, a mechitza, a curtain, a mechitza was spread out in a way that it divided these two groups. According to L'divrei ha'omer, Pesach is allowed to l'chatchila be eaten in two groups. It doesn't bother me that now the groups were divided into two. Keep on eating. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you're good oichlin. However, l'divrei ha'omer, and this is the Tanach of Shimon, that eina Pesach nechol b'shtei chaburos. Yes, guys, a yachid can leave his group once he began with everyone else, like the Marsha explains over here. But for the whole group to leave, when you divide it, it's like a new group. The original chabura is now broken into two. Then ein oichlin, you may not eat. And let's go into the opposite scenario. Two groups were eating. And guys, we're speaking about two groups eating two separate karbanos. One here and one there. And they were divided by a mechitza. So two karbanos, two groups, and in the middle of the meal, the nestalka mechitza b'neim, the mechitza was removed. Now it's interesting, how do we view that? If I began here and you began over there and the mechitza was removed, it's not like I lost my place. I'm still in my place, but I'm also now in your place. I'm also open to a new area. And therefore, according to Divrei Ha'omer, this refers to Rab Shimon, that ha'oichel b'shtei merkavos. The animal has to stay in one place. The eater can go to a new location, then you can continue eating. I know that an entire group cannot uproot itself, but when the mechitza was removed, no one uprooted themselves. What happened is that in addition of me eating here, I'm also eating with you. I'm also eating with my group. So you're good. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, that he teaches that the person has to stay in one location, even though I'm also in my location, but I'm also open to a new location. Since there is also a new location, then you have to stop eating. Now, each one of these two statements could be challenged, and we'll read it in the Gemara. So when Yosef Rav Kahana, and he was quoting this nafkamina in both of these interesting cases, but he quoted it the way the Gemara quoted it. Right, when he was teaching it, when he was teaching these halachas in a definite way, right, spreading out a partition turns them into two groups. Not it might. Removing a partition means that they are open to a new group. So it could be. So Amalei Ravashi Rav Kahana, listen here. I hear what you're saying, but I would word it differently. I wouldn't say this in a definite way. I would ask that question. These two scenarios should be recorded, should be learned as an inquiry. Do we say silik mechitza or vasiyas mechitza mihava kebeis mekayimos or kebeis chaburos, and therefore it will affect, like we learned above, let Rabbi Yehuda, let Rabbi Shimon, or maybe not. Maybe l'kula alma in both of these cases, maybe it's okay. And even if it's learned in a way of a boya, for that boya there's a takeoff. Okay, now we're focusing on the ending of the Mishnah. Hakala hoifechas es paneha. She turns her face, she averts her face. The Rashi in the Mishnah says we're speaking about Hakala eating the Korban Pesach. People are looking at her, they should not. And she feels uncomfortable, right? And let's go. The Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda demands of everyone to eat in their location. He says, if I began eating here, I have to eat over here. So can I turn my body 180 around from the table? Normally not. But if a kala is uncomfortable, she can avert her face. Says the Gemara, my Tama, why are we giving this dispensation to a kala? Even though, again, the Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, you have to stay to your location. She's embarrassed, she feels shy. Right, again, and people are looking at her. Good. Now it comes to the Gavaldik story. Many dinim to be learned from this story. Amar lahu, I'm sorry, I skipped a line or two. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Nassan, Ikla levei Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. He visited the home of Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. When he got there, Amrulay, they asked him, Ma shemach, what's your name? So he responds, Rav Huna. Amru, so they tell him, Nesav Mara Puria, let the master sit on the couch. Common people, commoners, sat on the ground, on a carpet, but on the ground. Someone was very chashiv, so they had these purias. He called himself Rav Huna. Rav Huna, sit on the couch. It's fine. He sat on the couch. Yovle Kasa, they offered him a cup, meaning a cup of wine, and he did not politely decline, as is the etiquette. Initially, he right away kableh. He right away accepted it. But chadzimno. Chadzimno means they only offered it once. The etiquette normally is someone offers you something. First, you politely decline, and then they offer it again, then you take it. He took it right away, but when he consumed it, when he was drinking the wine, he drank it in 2 drafts. He drank it twice. And veloy ahadar ape, and he did not turn his face. He drank it sitting, facing everyone. End of story. You know, everything that he did was challenged. So Amrulay, so they this my tama korisa, like it's like gaiva. So Amaluhu Bal Hashem Ani. The Baal Shem and the Gemara, title to my name. That's what Rashi says. From when I was young, they called me Rav Huna. Now, Rav is a title of greatness. But since they saw him as a child that great, they called him Rav. So if from your childhood you're called Rav, that's Rashi. So from when I know myself, I'm called Rav Huna. The Shpala Zayda. My name is the Shpala. From when he was a child, they called him already Azayda. Good. Why is it that when we offered you to sit on the more dignified sitting arrangement, normally people should politely decline, and you right away sat down over there? So Amrulahu, because there's a rule. I wasn't visiting. We were not, going out someplace. I went into your home. You're the balabayis. So there's a rule, my friends, that call balabayis. Everything that the balabayis tells you to do, asay. Look inside the parentheses. It's a big debate whether we have this in the text or not. Chutz mitzay. Notes, if I am sitting in your home as your guest, the rules of etiquette demands of me to obey what you're telling me to do. If we would have been in a common area, you would have told me to sit down on the most prominent of settings. I wouldn't have sat there initially. But in your house, I follow the balabais. Now, there's so many gewaldike insights into chutz mitzay. The Gra says, you know what chutz mitzay means? Not that if the balabais tells you to leave, you should not leave. It means that half don't be a guest in your own seichel and remove yourself before you come to that moment. Okay. My tamaki avlocha kasa. Why is it that when we gave you a cup, kibalta b'chadzimna, again you did not politely decline? Now, why didn't he? Could have answered over here that I already told you. But for this, he gave another answer. He told them that this etiquette of politely declining at first when an offer is made for you, only to accept it the second time around, is only if and when the offer is being made to you by someone who's an average person. So misarvin, you decline lekatan. But ve'ein misarvin legadol, if the great one is giving you is asking something of you or is offering something from you, the etiquette here is to accept it right away. So I did not decline, I accepted it right away because I consider you to be a gadol. Now, my tama ishatise betrezim. Now, why is it that when you consume the cup of wine, you drink it down in 2 gulps, in 2 drafts? So Amalahu, he says that's a clear brayso. The Tanya that ashoyse koyse b'basachas, whoever has a cup of wine, if they drink it down in one go, harei gargaron. That's a guzzler. In Yiddish, that's a zoifer. If you drink it down shnayim twice, that's derech eretz. That's proper etiquette. If you drink it with 3 sips or more, like those Frenchies, shloisha megase haruach, that's called hori. Oh, now we're going to see in a moment that that's not always the case. Good. Now, my tama lo yahadra apoch. Modesty should have demanded of you. People were looking at you because you're the newcomer. People knew of the great Rafuna. People were happy to look at you. So when you were consuming the wine, you should have turned your face around, similar to what we learned in the Mishnah. So he says, no. Omar lohu kale hoifechas paneh hatanan. Our Mishnah only gives that dispensation to a kala. Right? There is a difference in the genders. A kale, for her, people are looking at her, then it's correct for her to turn her face around. Not for me. There's no such rule of etiquette that even though, again, we should not be steering in anyone's, we should not look at a person when they're eating. It's not derech eretz. But the person who's being looked at doesn't need to turn his face around. That's not considered for him. He's acting modestly. He's going beyond. The only person who should be turning herself around is a woman while she's a kala. Now, similar but not same story. Rabbi Yishmael ben Rabbi Yosi ikla lebei Rav Shimon ben Rabbi Yosi ben Lekonya. And to this Rabbi Yishmael, again, they gave a cup. And the same thing, guys, the last narrow line, Kabbalah b'chadzimna, he did not politely decline. He right away took it. And here, when he drank it down in one go, one draft. The shasi b'chadzimna. So the first white line, so Amrulei. So they asked Rabbi Yishmael, does the master not hold that we learned in the Brisa that if you drink down the cup in one shot, you're called a garger? So there was some humor here. So Amar Lohu, so he tells them, they didn't say this in your little cup. When someone, if I would have been given a nice big cup of wine, then drinking it all down in one draft is not nice. It's too much. But you guys gave me a little cup. Number one. Number two, your wine is sweet. Now, you can learn this both ways. Your wine is sweet. Me being spoiled here in LA, Mastama means that sweet wine is not good. So when it's bad wine, you want to get over with it. I drink it down in one gulp. Or he meant that the wine is so good that I drank it at one time. And also, v'keresi rachava, I'm a big person. You know, it has to do with the size of the cup and the size of the person. For someone of my size with a big stomach, with your little cup, drinking it one time is not the end of the world. Right then, let's finish now. Rashi learns that the end of the Pedic, which is fascinating, are really halachas about a waiter. Now we're speaking about a waiter who was paid to do a service, but you know, if the more you define something when you go into contract with a person, the better it is. But if certain things were left vague, then we have to fall back on the default Torah halacha. So if a group of people hired a waiter and they agreed, they made an agreement, but now there are a few people that want to start the meal prior to the others' arrival. It's a lot easier for the waiter to serve when everyone is there together, because then you bring it out once. So at what point can the smaller group say to the waiter, we want to start, we are already, I'm not one person, we're not 2 people, it's 3 people. You have to start serving us. So that's what Rafuna says. That the Chabura nechnasim b'shloisha. Once 3 people arrive from the group, they can demand of the waiter to start the service. That's the beginning of when he has to be. Let's go to the ending. Again, it's a lot easier that when people start to leave, that the waiter says, guys, that's it. My service is done. The dinner is not so. When they're sitting to eat, even though certain people left earlier, the waiter has to remain there even if there's only one person left. V'yotzim afilu be'echad. Okay. So says Rabbi, on both of these dinim of Rav Huna, number one, v'hu da'ayel be'idna deregili lemeya. In other words, if the people that want to start the meal early, if they determine the time, lunch will be served, at 1 p.m., they come early, even though there are 3 people or more people, then he's not mechuyev to serve them earlier. If the whole group would come, maybe yeah, because then he's serving everyone together. But this concept that the waiter is inconvenienced is only if they are beginning, and really Rashi writes, and ending within the normal time, and vuhu deragash vuhu dayola, and that's only if the intentions of the people were told to the waiter in advance, says Rashi, that some people are going to leave earlier, some people are going to leave later, because it's a big toirach for the waiter to have to wait on individuals. So as long as he knew about that and they're eating within the regular time frame, then you're good. And now one additional din or two additional dinim that we won't pass on, like Amar Avina. Even when you have all of these rules are being met and the waiter now has to service them. However, the noisnens chadamim means that the last two people, Hitaka has to stay and service them. Let's say the agreement was to pay the waiter $100 and there are 10 people. So that means that everyone should pay $10. No, the people that are staying later and we are obligating the waiter to stay for them, their share of the $100 should be more. Because the waiter is not going to get more money. But they have to give more. That's rule number one. And the final rule is, who gives the tip? It's gavaldik. So the Gemara says, Ravina says, the last one should give the tip. It makes so much sense because what we're trying to do is we're trying to be menschlich for the waiter. So if the last one has to give a tip, what's going to happen? People are going to start removing themselves quicker. I don't want to be the last one. So at least the service will end earlier or something like that. So on that, says the Gemara regarding Ravina, regarding the laws of Rafuna, we are accepting. But regarding these last dinim of Ravina, say on both, that the group, let's say 10 people, whether they all ate together, whether people began earlier, whether people left later, the amount of per person does not change. And also regarding the tip doesn't come from the last person. We don't paskin like Ravina. I'm thinking, I'll be Pnimius perhaps, that who's the last? What's the last? Who's the shamish? That we have the sparks of holiness that we have to redeem. And our generation, we're the shamish. We're the ones that are bringing Mashiach. So Rafuna is suggesting that we get a tip. That verstehst? That the people, the last nitzoitzos, the last sparks of holiness that's being serviced by the Jewish people, we have to get a tip for that. And Taka, the Rebbe benched our generation with that Rebbe. We have some koyach that we were given in order for us to be able to be in service of the last moment of Golus. And may we conclude this Perek and conclude the whole Golus. God willing, Chevra, tomorrow we are already starting the 8th chapter. Just to know, we only have 2 more chapters. It means it starts on Daf Pesachim, but it ends on Daf Tzadik Tes. And then we're going to start, God willing,
That's beautiful.
Chazaku Baruch.
Thank you.
Did the waiter ever wear a mask so that
let me tell you something that Aaron, that we learned in Brachas. You know how they tipped the waiter? They would take the remaining oil and smear it on his head. That's the way they tipped the waiter. Because then people wanted that oil. Go try that today. Put a lot of oil on his head. Kavan, that's especially for Kavan. Good.